Nobody move. His spine has to be broken. The shout echoed across the cavernous maintenance bay before anyone even realized what had happened. Every set of alien eyes snapped toward the grated steel staircase just in time to see Ryan Carter tumble the last 8 feet, bounce awkwardly off the deck, and land flat on his back with a metallic clang that rang through the entire room. A tray of calibration modules scattered across the polished floor, rolling beneath workstations as dozens of technicians froze in stunned silence. Chief Xenobiologist Dr. Lasara felt her pulse spike. According to every anatomical database in the Galactic Union, a fall like that should have left a species with an upright skeletal frame unable to stand without immediate medical intervention. Her wrist scanner instantly activated, projecting bright amber warnings across her vision. Elevated cranial impact, cervical compression, high probability of severe trauma. Around her, engineers whispered in horrified disbelief. One reptilian mechanic covered both mouths with trembling hands. Another quietly muttered, "He was speaking 2 seconds ago." Nobody moved. Nobody wanted to witness the final moments of the only human assigned to the research station. Then Ryan groaned. Well, that was embarrassing. He blinked at the ceiling for a second before rubbing the back of his head with one hand. Did anybody save my coffee? The room stayed perfectly still. Dr. Lasara actually thought the station translator had malfunctioned. "Mr. Carter," she said carefully, taking one cautious step forward. "Please remain where you are." Ryan looked around, confused by every horrified face staring back at him. "Why?" "Because you have suffered catastrophic structural damage." He frowned. "I have." He flexed one shoulder, then the other. He bent one knee, rolled onto his side, pushed himself upright with a small grunt. "Feels okay." Several aliens gasped all at once. One engineer quietly backed away from him as though witnessing something supernatural. Lasara's scanner recalculated 3 separate times before displaying the same impossible conclusion. Minor bruising, slight muscle strain, elevated adrenaline. Expected recovery time, approximately 48 hours. She stared at the report, then back at Ryan. "No," she whispered almost to herself. "That cannot be correct." Ryan finally noticed everyone watching him. "Seriously, guys," he said with an awkward smile. "It happens. It happens," Lasara repeated. "Sure." He shrugged. Missed the last step. The translator paused for nearly a full second before producing the sentence in Galactic Standard, as if even the software struggled to accept it. One of the younger researchers slowly raised a trembling hand. "You are saying you voluntarily descended incorrectly?" Ryan laughed. "Trust me, there was nothing voluntary about it." He reached down, picked up one of the dropped calibration modules, and winced for half a second before straightening again. "Guess I owe maintenance a new coffee mug." Nobody laughed with him. Lasara stepped closer, disbelief replacing panic. "Mr. Carter, have incidents like this occurred before?" Ryan looked genuinely surprised by the question. "You mean tripping?" "Yes. Since I was a kid." "How frequently?" "Honestly." He scratched his chin. "Probably a couple times a month if I'm busy." Silence swallowed the maintenance bay. Across the room, an elderly navigation specialist slowly sat down because his legs no longer felt steady. Another technician whispered, "How has their species survived long enough to invent faster-than-light travel?" Ryan caught only the last part and chuckled. "Practice, I guess." Dr. Lasara never took her eyes off him. Every law of evolutionary biology she had spent 42 standard years teaching suddenly felt incomplete. The impossible part was not that the human had fallen. It was that everyone else seemed to think surviving the fall was impossible, except the human himself. Ryan Carter had expected a quick checkup, a clean bill of health, and maybe a little good-natured teasing from the maintenance crew. Instead, he found himself sitting alone inside the most advanced medical laboratory in the Galactic Union, with 6 hovering diagnostic drones circling his chair like curious birds. The bright white examination room was almost painfully quiet. Every surface gleamed with polished silver alloy, and every instrument floated silently into position without a single visible wire. Ryan leaned back and looked around with an amused smile. "I have got to say, this is the nicest place anyone has ever sent me for missing a step." Nobody laughed. Dr. Lasara stood behind a transparent display filled with rapidly changing biological charts. She had personally ordered a complete xenobiological examination, something normally reserved for first-contact species or patients exposed to unknown pathogens. None of her colleagues questioned the decision. They had all seen the fall. They had all seen the impossible recovery. "Mr. Carter," she said calmly, "I would appreciate your complete cooperation." Ryan nodded. "Sure. Fire away. Have you experienced dizziness?" "Not really." "Blurred vision?" "Nope." "Memory loss?" Ryan thought for a second. "I forgot where I left my truck once, but that was back in Denver." The translator faithfully converted every word. Several researchers quietly exchanged confused looks. One finally whispered, "What is a truck?" Ryan caught the question and smiled. "Big vehicle. Terrible gas mileage. You end up walking more than you planned." That earned another wave of silence. Lasara continued without reacting. "Please place your hand on the scanner." Ryan did as instructed. A ring of blue light swept slowly over his fingers, wrist, arm, and shoulder before moving across his chest and skull. Numbers flooded the display faster than anyone could read them. Heart rhythm stable. Neural activity normal. Bone density within expected human parameters. Minor tissue inflammation already decreasing. One younger medical officer frowned. "Doctor, the damaged muscle fibers are repairing themselves faster than the projected baseline." Another checked the data independently. "The swelling is already reduced by 11%. Ryan looked between them. "Is that bad?" Nobody answered immediately. Lasara enlarged the cellular scans until individual muscle fibers became visible. Tiny microscopic tears were already reorganizing themselves with remarkable efficiency. "How long ago did the incident occur?" she asked quietly. Ryan glanced toward the wall clock. "Maybe 20 minutes?" The room fell silent again. According to every predictive model in the Union database, the inflammation should have been increasing, not fading. Lasara walked closer, studying Ryan's expression instead of the medical charts. There was no fear, no denial, no attempt to impress anyone. He genuinely believed nothing unusual had happened. "Tell me honestly," she asked. "When you fell today, were you frightened?" Ryan shrugged. "For about half a second. And afterward, mostly annoyed." "Annoyed?" I spilled my coffee. One of the drones paused in midair as if even its operating system needed time to process that answer. Lasara folded her hands behind her back. "You were not concerned about permanent injury?" Ryan gave her a puzzled look. "Doctor, I played football in high school. I have slipped on ice, fallen off ladders, crashed mountain bikes, and once walked straight into a glass door because I thought it was open. Stuff happens." Every alien in the room stared at him. Ryan noticed their expressions and chuckled softly. "Wait, you all seriously never trip?" The researchers looked at one another before a gray-skinned physician answered carefully. "Among civilized species, accidental loss of balance after childhood is considered an extremely rare neurological event." Ryan blinked twice. "You are kidding." "We are not." Ryan leaned back in his chair, suddenly realizing why everyone had reacted the way they had. "Well," he said with an awkward grin, "that explains why you all looked like I had exploded." No one smiled. Instead, every researcher quietly opened a new report. The question that had begun as a routine medical examination was rapidly becoming something much larger. For the first time in Galactic Union history, the scientific community was no longer asking whether humans could survive a fall. They were asking how an entire civilization had been built by people who seemed perfectly comfortable getting back up every time they hit the ground. By the following morning, Dr. Lasara's private research queue had overflowed. What began as a simple medical report had quietly spread through nearly every scientific department aboard Horizon Station. The official title on the request read Comparative Human Balance and Recovery Assessment, but everyone who opened the file asked the same question before reading the first page. How could an intelligent species survive if falling down was considered normal? Ryan Carter, meanwhile, had completely forgotten about the incident. He was back inside Maintenance Sector 7 tightening a coolant manifold with a socket wrench while humming an old country song his father used to play during weekend repair projects back home in Colorado. He looked exactly like every other morning. Coffee in one hand, grease on his sleeve. Half of his attention focused on the job and the other half wondering what to order for lunch. Behind the observation glass, however, 12 alien scientists watched him like he was the most fascinating organism ever discovered. "He is walking normally," one researcher whispered. "His gait shows no compensation for yesterday's injuries." Another enlarged the live scan. Inflammation has dropped another 19%. Lasara folded her arms. Continue recording. One younger biologist hesitated before speaking. Doctor, perhaps yesterday was an isolated event. Lasara did not answer immediately. Instead, she pressed the intercom. Mr. Carter, would you mind joining us for a brief interview during your break? Ryan looked up, smiled, and wiped his hands on a shop towel. Sure, as long as somebody promises there are cookies this time. 20 minutes later, he sat comfortably inside the conference room, sipping fresh coffee while a semicircle of researchers surrounded him. The atmosphere felt less like an interrogation and more like a classroom where nobody knew the right question to ask. Lasara began carefully. We have reviewed your medical history. Ryan nodded. Okay. It appears you fractured your wrist at age 12. Skateboard. You dislocated your shoulder at 19. Football. You sprained your ankle at 24. Mountain trail. You required stitches at 27. Ryan smiled. Kitchen accident. Long story. Several researchers stared in disbelief. One finally interrupted. You continued participating in these activities after repeated injuries? Ryan laughed. Of course. Why? He shrugged as if the answer were obvious. Because they were fun. Silence settled over the room again. One scientist quietly muttered. The risk analysis is incomprehensible. Another leaned forward. Did these experiences not create fear? Ryan thought honestly before answering. Sometimes. The first time you wipe out on a bike, it definitely gets your attention. But after you learn what you did wrong, you try again. Even after pain? Especially after pain. Lasara narrowed her eyes. Explain. Ryan rested his coffee on the table. Look, when I was a kid, my dad never yelled if I fell. He just asked one question. He smiled at the memory. He would say, "What did you learn?" The room remained completely silent. Ryan continued. You fix what went wrong. Then you get back on the bike. Or the ladder. Or the trail. That is kind of how life works where I come from. One elderly researcher slowly lowered his data pad. Among my people, he said quietly, children who experience repeated falls are permanently restricted from advanced physical training. Ryan blinked. Seriously? Our society believes repeated accidents indicate poor evolutionary fitness. Ryan leaned back with genuine surprise. Back home, we usually call it growing up. Nobody wrote for several long seconds. Then every tablet in the room lit up at once as scientists began revising decades of accepted biological theory. Dr. Lasara looked at Ryan with growing respect. For the first time, she realized humans were not ignoring failure. They had built an entire culture around learning from it. The interview should have ended the discussion. Instead, it ignited something much bigger. Within 48 hours, Dr. Lasara received authorization from the Galactic Science Council to access humanity's public educational archives. Nobody expected to find anything extraordinary. They assumed they would see carefully engineered training methods designed to prevent accidents. What appeared on the main screen left the entire research team speechless. The first recording showed a toddler taking 3 uncertain steps across a living room before tipping forward onto a carpet. The child's mother smiled instead of panicking. Come on, buddy. Try again. The little boy giggled, pushed himself back onto his feet, and immediately tried another step. The next recording showed a 7-year-old girl wobbling across a bicycle for the first time. She drifted sideways into the grass, laughed so hard she could barely breathe, climbed back onto the bike, and tried again. Then came teenagers learning to ski, adults climbing rock walls, construction workers practicing safety drills, firefighters training through obstacle courses, and athletes falling over and over while perfecting their technique. Every video ended the same way. They stood back up. Nobody treated the fall itself as the failure. Lasara quietly paused the archive. Resume the first recording, she said. The toddler appeared again, smiling despite the stumble. One researcher looked genuinely disturbed. Why does the parent not intervene? Another answered before Lasara could. Because she expects it to happen. They watched another hour of recordings. Then another. The pattern never changed. Humans did not eliminate mistakes from childhood. They normalized them. Later that afternoon, Ryan stopped by the laboratory carrying a paper bag from the station cafeteria. Somebody said you all skipped lunch again. He placed the bag on the table. Turkey sandwiches. They were running a special. None of the researchers moved toward the food. They were still staring at the frozen image of a child learning to walk. Ryan followed their eyes and laughed softly. You found the baby videos. Lasara nodded slowly. Your young are permitted to fail repeatedly. Ryan smiled. That is kind of the whole job description. But every failure carries risk. Sure. Then why continue? Ryan leaned against the table for a moment before answering. Because nobody starts out good at anything. He pointed toward the screen. That little guy probably fell 50 times before he figured it out. If his parents picked him up every single time and never let him try again, he would never learn to walk on his own. The room grew quiet again. One elderly researcher spoke almost to himself. Our children are guided by stabilization harnesses until complete balance is achieved. Ryan looked surprised. Really? Yes. We remove nearly all possibility of falling. Ryan considered that for several seconds before asking the question nobody else had thought to ask. Then how do they learn what to do after something goes wrong? No one answered. The silence stretched across the room. Finally, Lasara replayed another recording. This time it showed a young boy missing a baseball, swinging again, missing again, then finally connecting with a smile that lit up his entire face. She watched the celebration instead of the mistakes that came before it. For the first time in her distinguished career, she wondered if the Galactic Union had confused safety with growth. Humanity had not become resilient because they avoided failure. They had become resilient because failure had never been treated as the end of the story. 3 days later, Horizon Station's central simulation chamber was filled to capacity. Engineers, physicians, behavioral scientists, and military observers packed the elevated viewing galleries, each carrying the same quiet expectation. Today, the debate would finally end. If humans truly learned through repeated failure, then the theory should be easy to test. Dr. Lasara stood at the center console beside Ryan Carter as a holographic obstacle course slowly materialized across the chamber floor. Floating platforms, uneven terrain, narrow balance beams, shifting ramps, and movable barriers stretched nearly 200 feet from one end of the room to the other. The objective is simple, Lasara explained. Navigate the course as efficiently as possible. Ryan studied it for a moment and smiled. Looks like one of those team-building events companies make you do. Across from him stood another volunteer, an accomplished alien navigation specialist named Tarek. According to Galactic Union records, Tarek had never experienced a significant balance failure in his entire life. His posture was flawless. His movements were mathematically precise. Several researchers quietly predicted he would complete the course in record time. The countdown began. At the signal, Tarek moved first. Every step landed exactly where it should. His body remained perfectly centered as he crossed the first balance beam without the slightest adjustment. The audience nodded with satisfaction. Exceptional control, one observer whispered. Ryan started several seconds later, carrying the relaxed posture of someone out for a weekend hike. Halfway across the first beam, his right foot slipped. Whoa! He windmilled his arms, stepped off the side, landed safely on the padded platform below, laughed at himself, climbed back up, and kept moving. A ripple spread through the observation deck. Tarek never looked back. He continued flawlessly until reaching a section where the floor unexpectedly tilted several degrees. His body froze. He hesitated, searching for the perfect correction. 3 seconds passed. Then 5. Ryan reached the same obstacle moments later. His first step landed awkwardly. He stumbled again. Still slippery, he muttered with a grin. Instead of stopping, he adjusted his weight instinctively, found a new rhythm, and continued across the shifting surface without overthinking it. The simulation grew more unpredictable. Moving platforms changed speed. Railings shifted position. The environment rewarded adaptation rather than perfection. Tarek slowed with every unexpected change, carefully recalculating before each movement. Ryan made mistakes almost constantly. He bumped into a rail. He caught himself with one hand. He chuckled after nearly walking into the wrong passage. Every small error seemed to teach him something new about the course. By the final stretch, something astonishing happened. Ryan no longer moved cautiously. He anticipated the changing terrain almost instinctively. While Tarek continued searching for perfect solutions, Ryan simply adapted to imperfect situations. The finish timer stopped. Ryan crossed first by nearly 12 seconds. Nobody in the chamber applauded. They were too busy staring at the final analytics floating above the arena. Tarek had committed only one measurable error during the entire simulation. Ryan had recorded 17. Yet Ryan completed the course faster because he lost almost no time recovering from those mistakes. Dr. Lasara enlarged the performance graphs until the entire chamber could see them. "This," she said quietly, "changes everything." Ryan accepted a bottle of water from a technician and shrugged. I just kept going. Lasara looked from the charts to the human standing casually beside her. The simulation had not rewarded flawless execution. It had rewarded resilience. For generations, galactic science had measured intelligence by how rarely a species failed. Humanity had just demonstrated a completely different equation. The advantage was never avoiding mistakes. The advantage was learning so quickly that mistakes became part of moving forward. A week after the simulation, Horizon Station received an assignment that should have been completely routine. A newly discovered research outpost on the moon of Kepris 4 had stopped responding after a violent electromagnetic storm knocked out its automated guidance network. The station itself remained intact, but the rocky terrain surrounding the facility had become unpredictable. Loose gravel, uneven cliffs, hidden cracks, and shifting ground made every step uncertain. Dr. Lasara volunteered to lead the scientific recovery team. When the operations director reviewed the personnel list, he immediately added one more name. "Ryan Carter. You are bringing the maintenance engineer?" one council representative asked. "His experience is relevant," Lasara replied. Ryan looked up from his toolbox when he received the assignment. "Wait, me? I fix coolant systems." Lasara smiled faintly. "You also appear unusually qualified for unstable terrain." Ryan laughed. "That is one way to put it." 2 hours later, the shuttle settled onto the dusty surface beneath a pale blue sky. The gravity was slightly lower than Earth's, making every step feel lighter, but the ground itself was uneven and covered with loose stone. The alien members of the team advanced carefully, placing each foot with remarkable precision. Ryan followed several yards behind, carrying a repair pack over one shoulder while looking around with genuine curiosity. "Nice view," he said. "Reminds me a little of Utah." Nobody knew where Utah was, but several researchers quietly added the word to their notes. They had traveled less than 300 feet from the landing zone when Ryan stepped onto what looked like a solid patch of rock. The surface shifted beneath his boot. That was not the right one. His foot slid, his balance disappeared for an instant, and he dropped onto one knee before catching himself with one hand. Dust drifted into the air. Half the expedition spun around in alarm. "Mr. Carter," Lasara called. Ryan looked up, brushing gray dirt from his pant leg. "I am good." Before anyone could reach him, he stood, tested the ground with the tip of his boot, and stepped around the unstable section. "Loose shale," he said. "Watch this area." The team carefully followed his new path. Nearly 20 minutes later, they reached a narrow ridge where the marked trail had partially collapsed. Tarek, the same navigation specialist from the simulation, stopped immediately. He studied the broken route through a handheld scanner, searching for the mathematically safest line across. Ryan crouched beside the edge, picked up a small rock, tossed it onto the slope, and watched how it rolled. "See that?" he asked. "The left side shifts too much. The right side is ugly, but it is holding." Tarek looked surprised. "You determined that without a terrain model?" Ryan grinned. "Years of hiking. You kind of get a feel for it." The group crossed safely, one person at a time. As they continued toward the outpost, Lasara realized something remarkable. Ryan never expected perfect footing. He assumed the ground would surprise him, so every step already included a backup plan. He bent his knees naturally, shifted his weight without thinking, and recovered from tiny slips before most people even noticed they had happened. It was not extraordinary reflexes that kept him moving. It was experience earned through countless ordinary mistakes. By the time the damaged research station finally appeared beyond the ridge, the alien scientists were no longer watching the landscape. They were watching the human, slowly beginning to understand that resilience was not a talent humans turned on during emergencies. It was a habit they practiced every single day. When the recovery team finally restored power to the research outpost, the mission itself turned out to be far less complicated than the journey getting there. Ryan spent the next several hours replacing damaged power couplings, recalibrating environmental controls, and helping a pair of exhausted technicians restart the station's communication array. By sunset, the emergency beacon was broadcasting again, and rescue traffic from Horizon Station confirmed that everyone would be heading home the following morning. While the others celebrated inside the operations room, Dr. Lasara quietly stepped into the observation dome overlooking the rocky valley they had crossed earlier. She found Ryan sitting alone on an equipment crate outside, holding a steaming cup of coffee and watching the stars slowly appear above the thin atmosphere. "Mind if I join you?" she asked. Ryan smiled. "Plenty of room." For several minutes, they sat without speaking. The silence was comfortable. Finally, Lasara broke it. "When I first met you, I believed your accident was evidence that humans were unusually careless." Ryan laughed softly. "My mother might still agree with you." Lasara smiled for the first time in days. "I no longer think that is true." She activated a small holographic display containing hundreds of reports gathered since the incident. Training records, medical histories, athletic studies, educational archives, expedition logs. They all pointed toward the same conclusion. Every species in the Galactic Union evolved to avoid failure whenever possible, she said quietly. "Our schools reward perfect answers. Our pilots train until mistakes become statistically insignificant. Our children are protected from unnecessary risk. We believed reducing failure was the highest form of intelligence." Ryan nodded. "Sounds reasonable." "It does." She looked down at the data again. "Except your species followed a completely different path." Ryan took another sip of coffee, but remained silent, letting her finish. "Humans do not celebrate failure," Lasara continued. "You simply refuse to let it define you. Every mistake becomes information. Every setback becomes experience. Every unexpected obstacle becomes another lesson." Ryan stared out across the valley where countless footprints still marked the route they had taken that morning. "My grandfather used to say something like that." "What did he say?" Ryan smiled at the memory. "He always told me that life is not about staying on your feet all the time. It is about knowing how to get back on them before you quit." Lasara repeated the sentence quietly, almost as if committing it to memory. Knowing how to get back on them. She realized that was the piece every scientific model had overlooked. Galactic biology measured durability, intelligence, coordination, and physical efficiency, but nowhere in thousands of years of research had anyone attempted to measure recovery. Not because recovery was unimportant, but because every other civilization had assumed avoiding mistakes was enough. Humanity had unknowingly evolved an entirely different advantage. Ryan finished his coffee and stood, ready to head inside. Lasara remained seated for another moment, watching the last sunlight disappear beyond the distant cliffs. She finally understood why the simulation had favored Ryan, why the expedition had seemed almost natural to him, why a simple stumble aboard Horizon Station had shaken an entire scientific community. Humans were not extraordinary because they never lost their balance. They were extraordinary because losing it had never convinced them to stop moving. As she followed Ryan back toward the station entrance, Dr. Lasara quietly deleted the original title of her research project. In its place, she entered a single new line. Human resilience is not the ability to avoid failure. It is the ability to continue after it. By the time the recovery team returned to Horizon Station, Dr. Lasara's findings had already reached the Galactic Science Council. What she expected to be another routine academic review quickly became the most discussed biological presentation in decades. Representatives from dozens of member worlds filled the massive auditorium, while thousands more watched through live transmission. Ryan Carter had no idea why he had been invited. He wore the same blue maintenance uniform he always wore, carrying a paper cup of coffee and looking noticeably uncomfortable among scholars dressed in formal ceremonial robes. "You sure they wanted me here?" he quietly asked Lasara before the session began. She smiled, more than anyone else. As the lights dimmed, a giant holographic display illuminated the center of the chamber. The first image appeared. It was security footage from Horizon Station showing Ryan missing the final step of the staircase and landing flat on the floor. A wave of quiet murmurs spread through the audience. The second image showed him standing less than a minute later. The third displayed the obstacle simulation. The fourth showed the expedition across Kepler's 4. Finally, the screen filled with hundreds of ordinary moments collected from Earth. Children learning to ride bicycles. Firefighters training through obstacle courses. Construction workers practicing emergency procedures. Elderly couples carefully hiking mountain trails. Teenagers laughing after wiping out on skateboards before climbing back on again. None of the footage showed extraordinary heroes. It showed ordinary people living ordinary lives. Lasara stepped to the center of the stage. For generations, she began, our civilization has defined intelligence as the elimination of error. We believe the most advanced species would eventually remove failure from daily life. The room remained silent. She continued. Humanity reached a different conclusion. The screen shifted to a graph comparing every major galactic species. Most displayed extraordinary stability until encountering unfamiliar conditions, where performance dropped sharply. Humanity's line looked different. It started lower. It included frequent mistakes. Yet it climbed steadily until it surpassed nearly every other species in long-term adaptation. Humans do not begin with perfection, Lasara said. They begin with repetition. One council member stood. Doctor, are you suggesting failure should be encouraged? No, she answered calmly. I am suggesting recovery should be taught. Ryan shifted awkwardly in his chair as hundreds of alien eyes turned toward him. One representative finally asked, Human Ryan Carter, were you aware your species possessed this unusual evolutionary strategy? Ryan blinked. Honestly, a few nervous laughs echoed through the chamber. Not really. We just call it life. More laughter followed, warmer this time. Ryan shrugged. Nobody I know wakes up hoping to mess something up. But if you do, you figure out what happened, fix it if you can, and try again tomorrow. That is about it. An elderly council member slowly lowered his notes. You make it sound ordinary. Ryan smiled. Because it is. The room became quiet once more. In that moment, many of the galaxy's greatest scientists realized why they had struggled to understand humanity. They had searched for hidden biological advantages, superior muscles, stronger bones, faster healing, or unique neurological structures. Instead, they discovered something much simpler. Humans had built families, schools, workplaces, and entire communities around the belief that making a mistake did not reduce a person's worth. It simply marked the beginning of learning. As the presentation ended, the audience rose to their feet, not because a human had demonstrated impossible physical abilities, but because an entire civilization had quietly revealed a strength no scanner, laboratory, or mathematical model had ever thought to measure. By Viet, several months passed, and life aboard Horizon Station slowly returned to normal, at least for everyone except Dr. Lasara. Her report had become required reading at universities across the Galactic Union. But what fascinated her most was not the scientific response. It was the quiet cultural changes that followed. Training academies began redesigning their obstacle courses. Schools removed some of the automated stabilization systems that had prevented every stumble. Instructors stopped asking students, "How did you fail?" and started asking, "What did you learn?" None of those changes happened because humanity had demanded them. They happened because one ordinary maintenance engineer had accidentally reminded an entire galaxy that progress was rarely graceful. Ryan Carter never thought much about any of it. One afternoon, he was carrying a replacement coolant pump through the station when he noticed a small group of alien children gathered near a recreation deck. One little boy with bright silver skin stood at the edge of a beginner climbing wall, staring upward with obvious uncertainty. His instructor smiled patiently. "Take your time." The child climbed 2 feet before his footing slipped. He landed safely on the padded floor with a surprised squeak and immediately looked around, expecting disappointment. Instead, the instructor simply asked, "What did you discover?" The child thought for a moment. "The blue handhold is too far away." "Then what will you try next?" "The green one." Ryan stopped walking. Something about the exchange felt strangely familiar. The little boy climbed again. This time he reached higher before losing his balance once more. He laughed, brushed the dust from his hands, and tried again without anyone telling him to. Dr. Lasara, who had quietly walked up beside Ryan, noticed the smile on his face. "Your grandfather would approve," she said. Ryan chuckled softly. "Yeah, I think he would." She watched the children for another minute before speaking again. "Do you know what surprised me most?" Ryan shook his head. "When I first met you, I believed resilience was a biological trait. I thought it lived inside your muscles, your bones, or your nervous system." She looked toward the children. "Now I understand it lives somewhere else." Ryan followed her gaze. "Where?" "In the way humans treat each other after someone falls." Ryan was quiet for several seconds before answering. That is probably true. He remembered learning to ride a bicycle while his father jogged beside him, remembered scraped knees, missed catches, wrong turns, broken projects, failed exams, and countless moments when someone had simply told him to take a breath and try again. None of those people had made him fearless. They had made him believe that falling was never the final chapter. An announcement echoed softly through the station, calling Ryan back to Maintenance Sector 7. He adjusted the heavy pump on his shoulder and started walking away. Just before turning the corner, his boot caught the edge of a floor panel. He stumbled forward one awkward step before catching himself. The nearby children looked at him with wide eyes. Ryan laughed, spread his hands with an embarrassed grin, and said, "Still working on it." The children laughed with him instead of at him. A heartbeat later, they turned back toward the climbing wall and kept practicing. Dr. Lasara stood alone in the hallway, watching the scene disappear around the corner. She opened her research journal one final time and wrote the shortest conclusion of her entire career. Humanity did not teach the galaxy how to avoid falling. Humanity taught the galaxy that every meaningful journey belongs to those who choose to stand up one more time than they sit down. Long after the report became another archived scientific paper, that lesson continued traveling farther than any starship ever could, carried quietly from one person to another, one imperfect step at a time.